Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to be showcasing the design process of some more wheels, which are being designed to fit 1/24th and 1/25th scale RC cars. The first wheel that I'm designing is inspired by the American racing Torq Thrust M, which is basically a modern interpretation of the original Torq Thrust wheels from the 1960s, which I modeled in a previous video. The design process is going to be similar to how I designed the other Torq Thrust wheels. If I recall correctly, I made a base sketch directly on top of a reference image during the design process of those wheels. For this, I'm just going off of a reference image, which you can see on the right side of the screen. You'll see throughout the design, specifically in the beginning, that I'll be making a lot of adjustments and modifications to the sketch, especially to the spokes, as I try to get the size and shape of them to look how I want. There's a lot less guesswork when modeling from a good reference image or blueprints, but since I'm not concerned about trying to make my model look exactly like the full-size version down to every detail and measurement, I just mess with the design until I'm satisfied with how it looks. As with pretty much any other wheel that I've designed in Fusion, I like to start with a base sketch from which many of the elements of the wheel will be modeled from. Here I am experimenting a bit with the shape and size of the spokes. I use the circular pattern command to help visualize how the spokes will look. I decided that I wanted to have a bit of curvature to the front profile of the spokes rather than just a straight line. Once I was satisfied with the size and shape of the spokes, I moved on to sketching other elements, such as the lug nuts. Once finished with the base sketch, I wanted to start by modeling the spokes. I moved over to the sculpt environment so I could quickly and easily create a mesh with some nice curvature, just like what you see in the reference image. I created a sketch that was perpendicular to the previous, so I could make a curved line that's roughly the shape that I want the outer curvature of the spoke to be. I then created a simple mesh using the revolve command. Next, I used the match command to align the outer edge of the mesh to the sketch curve that I just created. I then made some adjustments to the mesh within the sculpt environment until the shape looked how I wanted. I did my best to get the shape of the spokes to look similar to the reference image, though it's tough to know the exact shape just from one photo. Once I was satisfied with the mesh, I moved over to the patch environment and turned it into a solid body, first by creating a sketch on the back, and then using the patch and stitch commands. Once it was a solid body, I revolved it to create the other spokes, and I then began working on the center of the wheel. This part of the modeling process was not the cleanest workflow, since I was doing a lot of minor adjustments to certain parts until it started to look how I wanted, and at one point I extruded from the base sketch instead of from the body like I should have in that instance. Regardless of this sloppy modeling, I ended up with a nice result and made sure that this part of the wheel would not be too thin and prone to breaking. I began beveling many of the edges around the center of the wheel, just like what is seen in the reference image. With the front side of the wheel really starting to take shape, I made a space in the back where a standard hex mount could fit so that the wheel can be mounted to a vehicle. Here I wanted to make sure that the area between the opening for the lug nuts and this back part of the wheel isn't too thin. At this point, the center section of the wheel was looking great, and I was ready to move on to modeling the outer section. If you look closely at the reference image, you'll notice that the section where the spokes connect to the outer part of the wheel has a bit of a chamfer, which I replicated by creating a sketch profile and revolving it. After that, I began extruding the outer part of the wheel. To add a little bit more detail, I beveled some of the edges. Finally, I combined both the inner section and the outer section, and beveled the outer edge of the spokes. I'm really pleased with how the finished wheel turned out. Two things I did notice after seeing more images of the Torq Thrust M is that the spokes on the wheel I modeled are a bit thinner than what are on the full-size version when viewed from the front. Also, the backside of the spokes on the full-size version have more of an outward curve rather than just having them flat like what I made. Although making an exact replica wasn't the goal for this design, I may continue to mess around with it to possibly incorporate some of these elements. I printed out a set of these wheels. Some of the print settings were incorrect, so they didn't turn out perfect, but they were good enough for a quick mock-up. I'm planning on using these wheels for the '85 Mustang build. I also modeled another wheel based on the American Racing AR23. The design process for this wheel was easier due to the more basic design, and I had a nice front view image that I could use for reference. Once again, I started with a base sketch, using the reference image as a guide. With the sketch complete, I could begin to extrude sections from it. I started with the outer rim and worked my way towards the center. I went back to the original sketch to add a few more details, such as some circles I'll be using for reference later on when I make the center cap, and I added the lug nuts. In order to get the correct curvature for the spokes, I created a sketch perpendicular to the first and sketched the curve that I want the spokes to have. After revolving the face to create a body, I make a few minor adjustments to the sketch, which will be reflected in the solid body that was created. As you might notice, the openings in the wheel are not just a straight cut, but taper slightly. To replicate this, I create a new sketch set just behind where I will be making the cut. I then project the sketch lines that make up the opening from the original base sketch and offset the sketch lines. I then create a loft that I will use to cut the openings. At first I found the taper to not be enough, so I modified the rear sketch so that there was a larger offset, making the face smaller. With the openings now how I wanted them, I moved on to making the center cap. To complete the wheel, I added chamfers and bevels to some of the edges. Once again, I'm very pleased with the finished result. Both of these wheel designs will be making their way to the Make It RC shop at some point in the future. I also printed out a set of these wheels along with the others, but again, the improper print setup didn't really do these wheels justice. I'm looking forward to utilizing these wheel designs on future projects. That is all for this video. I hope you found it helpful and maybe provided you with a bit of inspiration and some ideas. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.